Welcome, everyone. Please sit down when you can. The Ordinance Committee has a quorum tonight, the necessary quorum. We're joined by Mayor McGovern to my left. To his left is Councilor Siddiqui. To her left is Councilor Mallon. On my right is the Vice Mayor, Devereaux, Councilor Sondervan, and my co-chair of the Ordinance Committee, Councilor Kelly. I'm Dennis Carlone, Councilor. The call of the meeting is as follows. The Ordinance Committee will conduct a public hearing to discuss a petition filed by Joseph T. McGuire, Alexandria Real Estate Equities, Inc., to amend the zoning ordinance by creating the Grand Junction Pathway Overlay District, adjacent to the Grand Junction Railroad right-of-way between Binney and Cambridge Street. So this hearing is being televised. It's also separately being audio copied. You might want to keep that in mind. There is an attendee and speaker sign-up lift right by the lady at the railing who's presently signing up. If you have an interest in speaking, you will have 3 minutes. Please do. We ask you to keep your comments to the point, literally at 3 minutes, so we have to stop you because it looks like as many as 15 people will be speaking. We recommend that if do not repeat everything in detail. If you support what previous people said, list that and then go into more detail about the areas that interest you the most. It actually helps your case more that way. At the end of the list of the people who signed up when we have public comment, I'll ask if there are other people who did not sign up who wish then to speak after hearing the discussions that will happen prior to the public comment. So the format of this hearing is, like all ordinance meetings, is as follows. The petitioner, and that is Alexandria Real Estate, will present their petition with their staff and architect. The city staff from community development and possibly from the solicitor's office will comment on that petition and give us background and an update on the planning board hearing on the same subject last night, which I also attended. At that point, we'll have the public comment that I discussed a moment ago. After that, the council gets the issues before us, and we will question the city, the petitioners, on issues that aren't clear, and have a discussion among ourselves. Now, some councilors we have many meetings at night, every night this week. That's not a complaint. It's just to say that some councilors might have to leave midway through. And because this is being taped, they can see anything they've missed or they'll get a written copy of the notes. I already know of at least one person that has a previously approved meeting. At the conclusion of the hearing, we will, among ourselves, talk about whether to keep this hearing petition in committee, which means it'll continue in the future. Usually the Ordinance Committee has at least 2 meetings, usually. Sometimes many more than that. Sometimes briefly there might be 1. So we will either keep it in committee or approve it to move on to the full council with a recommendation or not a recommendation. And we will see where that goes. So we thank you all for coming. There's a good amount of you here. If you wish to be notified of the next meeting, sign up on the same list and just indicate that you don't wish to speak. That way you're automatically notified. So we'll begin. The petitioners, please come forward for Alexandria Real Estate, and perhaps Joe or your designee can introduce the whole team to begin. And it's yours. Normally, the maximum time for a presentation is a half hour, but we know you can get it down to 29 minutes if you work hard. So welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is James Rafferty. I'm an attorney with offices at 907 Massachusetts Avenue. I represent Alexandria Real Estate Equities. Seated to my right is Joseph McGuire, Senior Vice President with Alexandria. To his right is Michelle Lauer, L-O-W-E-R, Assistant Vice President at Alexandria. And the project architect, J. C. Ben Morgan, is at the far right. That's spelled S-I-E-B-E-N-M-O-R-G-E-N. C. Ben Morgan.
Thank you.
And my apologies for not pronouncing that correctly last night to Mr. Ben Morgan. So, we have our first slide. So, as noted, Mr. Chair, this is a zoning petition filed by Alexandria seeking to create a new zoning overlay district in an area in eastern Cambridge, bordering between the Grand Junction Railroad and Fulkerson Street. The site is probably best known by its historical use as the Metropolitan Pipe and Supply Company. It operated there since at least the 1950s. Alexandria acquired the property about a year and a half ago. What's on the image today at the moment reflects the land ownership pattern of the property extending from Binney Street a few hundred feet down Fulkerson Street. The zoning district as proposed would include that property as well as the land running parallel to that property all the way down the Grand Junction corridor to a small 3,000 square foot parcel on Cambridge Street. And what the petition proposes to do is to create a mechanism within the current zoning that would allow for the planning board to consider applications for development that would be eligible for increases in height and density through a special permit process. The chief criteria or consideration for such an increase would be a demonstration of the delivery of a significant community benefit or public infrastructure. In our case, we've identified that public benefit, that community benefit, to be the completion of the creation and construction of the Grand Junction pathway between Binney Street and Cambridge Street. As I'm sure councilors know, the Grand Junction has long been a transportation and open space policy objective of the city. Its first appearance occurred in the 2000 Green Ribbon Study that identified the importance of creating this link. As recently as August of 2017, the Kendall Square Mobility Task Force identified this as a key element of the development of the greater Kendall Square, Eastern Cambridge area. Recently, rezoning petitions involving the creation of the Volpe District and the PUD 5 District involved contributions to the Grand Junction path by MIT in other segments of the path. And we'll show you in Mr. McGuire's presentation where those segments are. What we've proposed in this zoning petition is not dissimilar to the zoning petition proposed by Alexandria 11 years ago when they first began discussion about rezoning portions of Binney Street. Councilors may recall at that time the significant public benefit that Alexandria provided to the city was a 2.2-acre public park on Rogers Street. That park has been in existence for a while and is scheduled for design and construction later this year, is my understanding. But there were a significant number of other public benefits associated with that rezoning. So Alexandria, in this instance, recognizing that what the rezoning they were seeking would also need to be able to demonstrate a similar community focus or benefit, looked at the most obvious choice, which is the Grand Junction Rail plans that abut this property. And that's the underlying principal benefit here. What we're proposing in the zoning would be a special permit that would allow portions of the site to have a height increase to 120 feet and an FAR of 2.5. The current height permitted in the district today, it's currently a split zoning district, industrial A1 for the first half of it approximately, and the balance is residence C1. In the industrial A1 district, the height limit is 45 for commercial buildings. However, there's something called the Echo district that this parcel is a portion of. So residential buildings in certain sections of this site can go to 65 feet. So it's worth noting that even at the time of ECAPS, in the current zoning recognizes a distinction or a separation between building masses and height on the site, with height allowed in the area closest to Binney Street. Our proposal is designed to accommodate the development of a lab building of approximately 450,000 square feet. And our architect this evening will show the committee what that might look like as they have begun their early thinking. But we recognize this is a zoning exercise, a legislative exercise, and design and architecture come later. But in a rezoning that principally involves a single building, we recognize that there will be interest in seeing what the thinking is on the design. So we've left a few minutes in our 29-minute presentation for that to happen. Just quickly want to show the committee the site. I know everyone's familiar with it, but this represents the conditions a few months ago when Met Pipe was no longer in operation, but before the buildings were taken down. We're looking here at the intersection of Fulkerson and Binney Street. Binney is on the left-hand side of the photo, and Fulkerson is on the right. We have a few more pictures. This is looking down Binney Street as you approach the railroad tracks. You can see the buildings. The urban design benefits of that site have been lacking for decades. The sidewalk is compromised. It has been narrowed for years. Those items are all gone. What's also taking place across the street from this site on the Binney Street side is the development of the park. It's right here on the right after you cross the railroad tracks. We still call it the Pork Chop Park, but I read the other day that it has an official name on the CDD website as the Binney Street Park, but I don't know anyone who calls it by that name. But at any rate, we'll show you a little bit of our understanding of that development. We've got some images from CDD that we have included in this presentation as to what's expected there. But suffice it to say that that entire corner is about to undergo a significant improvement. One thing that we wanted to draw to your attention is the current patterns of land ownership, because as many councilors, I'm sure, have heard, we have recently, within the past year or so, acquired a new abutter. When Alexander first bought this land, the owner of the property next door had connections to the Met Pipe ownership, and that property was under agreement, and there was a development proposed that would create 42 or 46 units of housing. This image here shows you what the property line looks like today. The area currently in the gray is all of what Alexandria owns. The area in blue is the abutting property, which is now owned by Eversource. And what Eversource's intentions are, how they intend to use the site has been the source of concern and speculation. We were asked early in the process by city officials, some councilors we met with, even some abutters, about the opportunity for a potential land swap that might create a more regular pattern of lot ownership here. So what you see in this slide is what the land ownership would look like if, in fact, we concluded a negotiation that Alexander is presently engaged in with Eversource The blue area to the far right would become the Eversource parcel, and the area to the left, the purple square, would come under the control and ownership of Alexandria. It's close to a one-for-one swap, but it really underscores an important opportunity that we think exists in this site, and that is how the purple square there might be used. The development plan at the moment is not to put any building in that area, and in fact, we have talked about the possibility of conveying that land to the city for a public purpose to be determined by this body and others in Cambridge. That works for us if the footprint of the building stays off of that area. But a number of questions have come up about what does it look like today, what could it look like. So this slide, which is a recent addition to our presentation, is an attempt to help people visualize what the land transfer would produce in terms of a new form of ownership and what potential uses could go there. And the last slide in this presentation just identifies for the committee the extent of outreach we've had. We've been meeting with groups collectively, one-off, with individuals, with neighborhood organizations, and that's, of course, a pattern we'll continue through this process. Alexandria has a long history of engagement in the neighborhood. They are regular attendees at East Cambridge Planning Team. As the Binney Street corridor has been built out over the last decade, every building that's been built, every building that's proposed gets reviewed at ECPT. Design reviews occur there. We stay in regular communication and have for the life of that project. The expectation is that'll be maintained, that pattern of communication engagement will be maintained by Alexandria as they explore the development of the Met Pipe site. Now Mr. McGuire will kind of walk you through a few items.
Good evening, councilors, co-chairman Carlone. My name is Joe McGuire, resident at 273rd Street in Cambridge. I wanted to first just repeat some things that you may or may not know. Alexandria is a real estate investment trust. It owns about 4.5 million square feet in Cambridge and about 6.5 million square feet in the greater Boston area. We're here because of the science and technology that takes place. We purchased this 4.4 acre site just over a year ago, and we'd like to put it to good use. And the good use, I think, needs a process to be able to determine what that good use is. We think a good use would be a 120-foot high building off of Binney Street. And what we tried to do in our prior public meetings with residents is take a look at this. This is actually the second version of what we had proposed. There's still sentiment against this. We know that. We are working to get to a point where we can agree upon what is acceptable at this location. We felt keeping the building 306 feet away from the closest residential neighborhood was better than being on top of them. It just, I want to go to the next slide, please. We felt that being able to have an acoustic barrier that would separate it from the neighborhood, and that would be a very large green segment would be important. We looked at parking along and how parking would be accessed. The parking would be off of Binney Street. There would be an underground garage entrance at that location. We looked at where loading would go, and loading would be best to be off the street, so we're not loading on the, backing in off the street. We're pulling in and turning around and backing into a closed loading dock. We felt that this design, given its sustainability goals that we have, with a lot of light, we were very interested in this H design. We will continue to work through this process to see where we take ourselves. Next.
Go back to
So-
the courtyard. Go back.
So there.
Green light on the courtyard.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is a courtyard on the Fulkerson Street side. Jay Sabermorton will discuss the building. We have an additional rendering of that he will go forward with. But there's a couple of courtyards. It is important to note that what we're looking at is being able to have potential for public access during the day. When the building is open, that would be able to pass through from Fulkerson, cut through the building, and get to Binney Street. A lot of the desire line is to get over to 1 Kendall Square, where all the retail and the movie theater is located. Again, we chose 120 feet after looking at the context of the neighborhood. We saw the Amgen building across the street. We saw the height across in the MXD district with some very large heights that are over there, and we thought, coming down from that was the beginning of a transition. Again, as a community benefit, we in our prior zoning that we did on Binney Street, we tried to establish what would be something that we could trade with the community in order to have some desire for the zoning to take place. We thought it was something that the city has been long planning for. There's been planning for the Grand Junction Path for some 20 years now. And we thought making the connections between Binney Street and Cambridge Street, which is about 1,800 linear feet long, and a pathway of about 14 feet, would be very appropriate given the desires of having safe bike areas and pedestrian areas that are off streets. Again, this Grand Junction pathway has the potential to go from Boston all the way over into Somerville and making connections into Boston and the North End eventually. There is one section of this that's currently constructed. It's between Main Street and Broadway. And then there's another section that will be built later this year by the city after the land was provided and funding was provided by Boston Properties and the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority. That is going to go under construction sometime this spring and summer, and we would propose to connect to that. Again, 1,800 linear feet, one of the largest segments of it to occur yet. And we would follow on, others would follow on, meaning MIT, with their commitment from the Volpe site to extend it, and others still could actually make the connection from up at the Miller River and to the Somerville line. Again, the yellow area is the Grand Junction line and the portal that's on the front there. Again, it's 1,800 linear feet, Cambridge Street all the way to Binney Street, following the track line. You'll note that there is a number of uses that are nearby. The Loyal 9 there is to the left. We did purchase the salon, former hair salon and residential unit that's right in front of us. That's 686 Cambridge Street, which is just beside the St. Anthony's Church. So we've purchased that. We've paid a handsome sum for it. Some would say we probably paid too much for it, but we had to motivate the owner to sell. The reason why we purchased it, it was to be a portal. It would be it would on both sides of Cambridge Street here. There would be pocket parks. One is the Peter Vellucci Park. It's just off the screen to our left. This would be a second one on Cambridge Street leading into the park. And this is just an idea of what it would be like. Shown here is again is 686 Cambridge Street, which is to the right. That building would be part of this parcel that we provide to the city. We're also in conversations with St. Anthony's about the long strip that would connect to the land that we own, which is up to the left, which is not in red. But the idea here is that we're working with the church and have been for a number of months, and we have a signed letter allowing us to come forward in terms of the zoning. In an effort to begin working with the community, we came back after a meeting at the East Cambridge planning team where we were asked very succinctly by one of the members to consider stepping down, and it was some sentiment to begin studying what a step down would be. So we drew a building here which got much closer to the residential area. That wasn't our first desire. I think it's something like 96 feet away. It's hard to see that in this, but it basically it's a step down. If we show the next slide, you'll see that we're looking at 105 feet, stepping down to 45 feet. It's a building that again there was very little sentiment for support from the neighborhood. So what I wanted to point out here is that, you know, Alexandria would propose to provide the land and the ability to build that land would be provided to the city. The reason for what we're trying to do here is we're trying to provide a location for science and technology. We feel that there'd be over 1,000 people that could be employed in Cambridge that aren't here necessarily today. And it would give an ability for science and technology to continue to expand in one of the best science clusters in the entire world. We along with the jobs would come over $6.6 million in incentive zoning fee, depending upon what it is at that time. And I would point out is that there are 375 union jobs, because these would all be 100% union. We've done PLAs with the unions in the past. We'd be prepared to do that again at this building. Those jobs would last for nearly 3 years. A very important part to the community. And if you just look at 20 years of income that would be derived by the city just in the real estate taxes, it would be well over $88 million. That's a very conservative number that we've gone by. All told, all the while we're doing that, we'd provide an enhanced experience for people and pedestrians throughout the city that would be able to use this path that would be really begin to be very meaningful and safe.
Okay, we're reaching the end of our presentation. The one thing we wanted to point out is in this slide is a concept that began to emerge in our discussions with the community and upon further examination of the language in the petition. The way the petition is presently drafted, it speaks of an opportunity or an ability for a special permit to allow for an increase of up to 120 feet in height. We think it probably indeed makes sense to limit the location or area where such a special permit would be appropriate. So this is just an attempt to suggest one could have language that created zones for this. I think the line that might be most relevant is the second black line, which is a line that would say, and in this case you'll see it lines up with the far side of Ben Street, a point at which you couldn't change the height in the district. So the 45 feet height you see there is an area where you wouldn't allow for any increases in height And we think it's an attempt to try to begin to address a lot of the comments we've heard about can you step the building down, can you not have mass? I mean, at the end of the day, one of the trade-offs here, which is very apparent from the imagery we're showing, is the notion of greater height and density near Binney Street in exchange for little, if any, development as you go into the site. So this massing model is what Joe just showed you a few minutes ago, which was an attempt to identify the context of surrounding buildings. At the moment, the trade-off that's expressed here would be a point along Fulkerson Street, where at close to the intersection of Bent Street, where you wouldn't have any development beyond a certain point, and that distance, as we pointed out, was over 300 feet, and the much maligned three-tiered model that we showed, and there was reason for the criticism of it, was an attempt to begin to think about, well, if massing gets lower, it also gets closer, and how's that trade-off play out? So that we're just pointing out the fact that the current underlying theory behind what we're thinking would be an appropriate constraint or restriction put into the petition would be to designate an area where the added height would be permitted. As I said, the current zoning petition doesn't place a restriction on where the special permit could be applicable. We think that's probably a shortcoming of the petition and would anticipate some kind of language that would restrict it. I think, Jay, you'd probably be next.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Jay Siebenmorgan, architect within BBJ. We have just a few images, early image studies that we've been doing with the project, because as the massing that you see up here, this is a life sciences building. Anytime you start to study a project like this, we're also looking into sustainable benefits, well-being benefits, and how a building actually functions, which is the early rational reasons for the shape of the floor plate, and that is how you make the most efficient lab floor plate, but also while maximizing potential for natural light for the inhabitants of the building. So it is important to note that this project is currently being designed to go for 50% more energy efficient consumption, meaning 50% less energy than any of the buildings in the area, which also puts it on target to be one of the most energy efficient life sciences buildings in the United States. With that does come some constraints, which is how I don't want to get too technical with it, but basically how efficient we make the insulated value of the wall, which means minimizing the amount of glass within the facade. So that, but you're also trying to balance this with maximizing natural light for the inhabitants. I think that's just important to kind of set up what we're going to be seeing here, because that ultimately results in essentially a grid of windows on a facade. So we have a lot of ideas that we're starting to think about, especially how you design such a building in response to this, the quality of this urban space, but to the park. What you're seeing in the image here is the actual park design file that was given to us that we put into the computer model. So we're thinking deeply about how you create a unified kind of feel within that area, but also a welcoming presence to the project. What you're seeing in the middle is essentially social spaces within the building that actually enhance collaboration within the building, connectivity between people that work there. But it's also a bigger idea that threads into the middle zone that was mentioned. There's a courtyard space that we'll see at the end here. So that anytime you can increase these types of spaces in any type of work environment, it makes it a more productive and special kind of place to work within. So just to look at it from some different views here, we're also thinking a lot about with this type of a building, you want to activate the facade in ways that make the building come alive throughout the day. So When the sun moves from morning to afternoon, actually the play of shadow and light on the building will be quite active. And that's also intertwined with some study of color on the oblique, so the building changes as you move around it. And what you're seeing here on these kind of social spaces, actually passive shading louvers up the facade. And then as you come further down to the intersection at Galileo Way and Broadway, it's also important to have this kind of beautiful presence within this focal point and how it frames the space with Amgen on the left. But if you can imagine, the Status Center is behind us in this view. And as I mentioned, these social zones connect to the center between the two buildings in the central space as well. So it comes alive in a kind of different way. So this is a lobby space that connects the two wings of the project. And you have these similar types of programs within, but it's expressed in a different way. What's also important here is that in plan is the cut through that you see on the left, the opening there, is that people on Fulkerson Street, sorry, thank you. This is a view on Fulkerson Street looking in between the two masses. That the public can come and move through the building as a kind of pass-through space, but also will have be anchored by public amenities at the ground level. And this is the final image. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Council, I'm going to give you an opportunity if something isn't clear or if you wanted to clarify the petition in any way before we get to the city comments on the petition. Do you have a clarifying question? Mayor? Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few questions. I had the pleasure and the opportunity to go out and one of the neighbors allowed me into his home to take a look at the site from his perspective. I thought that was very helpful. I know some other councilors have done the same. If you haven't, it's informative and I think helpful. One question, you're using the Amgen building of 120 feet as sort of the barometer for why this building should be 120 feet, but right across the street is 301 Binney and other buildings that are 70 feet. Why aren't we talking about a 70-foot building instead of a 120-foot building? Those buildings are closer and sort of more closer to the neighborhood. Couldn't we just easily be making that argument as well?
We are prepared to look at other heights than what we've proposed at the 120 feet.
Okay. And then a couple more questions, Mr. Chair. If I understand correctly, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but is the plan in terms of the Grand Junction path, I was told that the plan was the construction on that path would not take place until after your building is built. And I don't know if that's accurate or not. If it is, I'm wondering why that is and why wouldn't we do both? Why wouldn't you do both at the same time, which would not only, I think, make less of a problem for the neighborhood, but also would get that path up and running a lot sooner than waiting?
There's a number of ways the path could occur. The fastest way would be if we actually built it, but we need the city's assistance in order to do that. So the path, we have not stated when the path would be there. We would deed over the land to the city immediately, and how it's actually built out remains to be discussed. But we would deed and make our payments as soon as that they're needed.
Okay.
Just by way of context, Mr. Mayor, if it's helpful, if I might, the model that was used at the Rogers Street Park was that upon the granting of the special permit, the conveyance of the land occurred, as did the payments for design and construction. There's been no contrary view expressed that there would be in a period of time where we'd have to wait for the building to be built. That would not be the pattern that Alexandria has followed.
Okay, thank you. Another concern I heard, well, let me just jump to one other thing about the path and just stay on that for a second. So, you probably, maybe you can't say this publicly because you're in negotiations with the church, but obviously to maximize the true community benefit of this path really depends on making that connection to Cambridge Street. So I'd feel a lot more confident and a lot better once that gets settled and gets done. If for some reason that doesn't happen, it really diminishes what that community benefit would be. So I hope that there's a finalization on that sooner rather than later. Another concern I heard was about that this petition would allow Alexandria to transfer any excess GFA within 3,000 feet. And people are, I think rightfully so, concerned about, that garage, which was supposed to be temporary, is probably going to come down at some point, and something else will go there. And, what happens if that extra GFA gets transferred there, and what is the process from what I've been told, that would be by right, and there'd be little opportunity for community input. So how does that work, and what assurances can you give to the neighbors that if that were to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whenever, that there'd actually be a community process in that by right project?
Well, first off, Mr. Mayor, the concerns about the language in the petition concerning the transfer of development rights within the 3,000 square feet arose early. And candidly, we had an internal debate as to whether or not it was even wise to put it in there. We've since concluded that it's not wise. It complicates the petition. It suggests some type of a blank check for future development that people were understandably concerned about. So we did file a communication with the planning board and with the city clerk indicating that we are asking the petition at some point in this process to be amended, and we have filed a revised petition which strikes out the relevant section that the clerk has, and we have made that known that we do not wish that portion of the petition to be adopted.
Great, thank you. And last question, Mr. Chair, and maybe this is Jay, is that right? Just in terms of one of the other concerns that we've heard, not just in this project, but other projects where there is residential near labs is, the mechanicals and the noise and that kind of thing. So in the terms of the design, is the plan to push the mechanicals as far away from the neighborhood as possible?
Yeah, I'd say it's so early in the process. There's a lot of work to figure out what the mechanical is.
Jerry, you need to get real close to the microphone.
Can you hear me? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to answer that one.
Okay, thanks.
So we would comply to all of the acoustic requirements that the city has laid forth for daytime and nighttime decibel levels, of which we've successfully done on our Binney Street projects. I just want to point out as well, at 1 Kendall Square, we've gone through an extensive number of projects since the short period of time that we've owned to actually replace equipment that used to be very noisy, that's not now very quiet. So we're making changes, and we're going to comply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Mallon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I actually had the pleasure of watching the planning board last night from my house, so I enjoyed the second presentation of this. But I did have a clarifying question about the Grand Junction path, and it is, so because of the 1 Kendall Square permit, special permit, part of this from Binney Street to where the St. Anthony's Church is already has to be part of the Grand Junction path, is that correct?
That is correct. The permit, the special permit that authorized the construction that's nearing completion now at 399 Binney Street does have language in it that says that if the city or the Grand Junction path, whoever, becomes real, my word, not there, then the landowner would contribute the land alongside the garage for that purpose. What it doesn't obligate is the construction and design of the path or payments related to how that would occur. So, and it's only a portion of the path. What Joe can describe is the current thinking in terms of the proposed width.
So the proposed width would be increased from what was promised in the prior owner's special permit for OKS. Right now, I believe it narrows down to 6 feet as you go by the parking garage. We'd widen it out to 14 feet. We found a way to be able to take an access lane away from the garage and create the wider lane.
Okay, so thank you. So you have purchased this property on Cambridge Street, and you are talking to St. Anthony's about that other piece. But no matter what you build on this particular parcel, whether it's 45 feet or 120 feet, that piece still has to be part of the Grand Junction path. It just, you wouldn't be designing it and constructing it. That would be on the city, and we would have a narrower path by the garage that would be 6 feet versus 14 feet. I just want to make sure I understand what we're actually getting in terms of a community benefit and what was previously in another special permit versus this one.
Right, so to be specific, the other special permit dealt solely with the land running alongside the garage. I don't know, did it include the land up past Linden Park as well?
It went up and it ran up to the St. Anthony's land. So it was a substantial piece that ran all the way from Binney Street all the way to the church's land. But it was narrower than it needed to be for a pathway, for a Grand Junction pathway, which has a 14-foot minimum requirement.
Okay, so, and this might be a question for the city staff, so I might save it, but it's my understanding that the city has $10 million for the acquisition, design, and construction of this path north of Binney. So there was a lot of talk last night from the neighbors talking about the city just purchasing the land and making the Grand Junction path and kind of keeping this cleaner. And so I'm just wondering if there is a path forward in that. So I'm going to save that question for the city staff, but thank you for clarifying.
I see no other hands up, so thank you. We'll move on to the city staff presentation. So we'll be joined by community development staff and I believe the city solicitor. As many of you know, last night there was a planning board hearing, as was mentioned, on the same subject. And prior to that, community development prepared a memo describing the situation as well as the petition. Madam Assistant City Manager, with many titles. Could you give us an update, please, and introduce your team?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Iram Farouk, Assistant City Manager for Community Development. To my left is the City Solicitor, Nancy Gloa, and to my right is Jeff Roberts, Director of Zoning and Development. Jeff will talk more about our analysis of this petition, but before we go there, I wanted to just jump to the punchline from last night's planning board hearing on this matter. So the board heard the zoning, and they have not yet voted to forward a recommendation to the City Council and instead have continued the hearing. So they expect to have additional discussion on this over the coming months, I would say. So that decision, while they often sent comments right away to the Ordinance Committee and the Council, their decision was primarily based on the comments that they heard from the public, and I will not repeat those because I see many of the same people who were there last night are here tonight, so they will, the Ordinance Committee will hear directly from them what their issues were. But the board has asked the proponent to consider alternative massing models, the concerns around height and density that have already become evident from some of the questions tonight, and be essentially more responsive and thoughtful to the transitional nature of the site between the larger scale of Kendall Square and then the residential development to the north and a little bit to the east and west. Both in East Cambridge as well as Wellington, Harrington, in the Cornelius Way, Linden Way neighborhood. So they have asked Alexandria also to work with the neighbors and to try to find some common ground so that when they come back, any amendments to the zoning changes or to the zoning suggested, as well as the massing that they bring forward, is more reflective of the issues that have been raised in the public comment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Roberts to speak to the analysis of the zoning petition.
I guess I could use both microphones if I wanted. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to briefly mention, so we prepared a report for this, a briefing, which is really a fairly basic overview, which contains 3 major parts, and I believe all the members have copies. The first part is just an overview of the technical aspects of the current zoning, and this talks a little bit about the specifics of what would be the outcome under the proposed provisions of the zoning. So that's the first few pages. It's supplemented by some maps that are provided attached to the end of the document, showing the overall outlines of the sites and areas that are relevant to this petition, as well as a map showing height limits in the area. The heights map, as some have pointed out, it's a little bit nuanced. It requires looking a little bit more at the text, because there are in this area what we call height bands, where for residential uses within that district, there's a range of different heights from 45 feet to 65 feet allowed, while for non-residential uses, the maximum height is 45 feet. The map also, as some have pointed out, shows the heights of existing buildings in the area labeled, but that is measured based on the highest point of the building. It often includes appurtenances and things like mechanical penthouses, which are not typically included within the zoning definition of the height for the purpose of establishing height limits. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the nuance of that. The second piece is a summary of past planning related to the Grand Junction pedestrian bicycle path, which, as the petitioners noted, has been a subject of planning for quite a while. A lot of this is material that should already be familiar to the council, because it's been provided. There have been various updates on the path and on the zoning strategy that's been discussed for the path, which has been the subject of some engagement and outreach that's been conducted over the past few years to meet with community members and property owners to discuss the notion of a kind of a transfer mechanism that would provide an incentive for the creation of portions of the pathway on private land. That section of our memo also summarizes some of the more up-to-date pieces of the or accomplishments in advancing that project, including some of the recent agreements with property owners along various sections of the path. Usually they've been different, the scenarios have been different, but usually the agreements have come in association with development proposals and have been part of broader development agreements. So that's the second part in brief, and the third part is just an overview of some of the past urban planning that's been done for these areas, including the Eastern Cambridge Planning Study, which is the study that established the zoning and design guidelines that are applicable to the site today. We also talk a little bit about the more recent Kendall Square study. While this area wasn't within the strict study boundaries of the Kendall Square study, the subjects that are the topics that are raised by the proposal have some relation to some of the general issues that have been discussed in that study and have continued to be discussed in the Envision Cambridge process, such as ground floor activation, open space, urban design in mixed-use commercial areas, transportation, sustainability, housing, innovation space, and workforce development. So that's just a brief overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have two, but I'll wait to see if my fellow councilors have any clarifying questions. Councilor Zondervan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you explain the relationship between the building height and the mechanicals penthouse that's somehow not part of that? And I find that very confusing.
I'll do my best through you, Mr. Chair. The height of buildings, as it's defined in zoning, is measured to the roof of the building, and the zoning has specific provisions for what is considered to be what's considered to be the roof of the building, and then what's considered to be equipment or appurtenances that are carried above the roof of the building. And based on those definitions and provisions that are sort of combined both in the definition of height as well as sections of Article 5 of the zoning ordinance, specify what kinds of equipment are considered to be above the roof of the building. So in many cases, there may be sections of the building, mechanical penthouses, that might be designed to appear like they're parts of the building, and often our urban design guidelines call for that kind of design treatment. But under our strict zoning definitions, those penthouses are considered to be above the roof.
And typically, how much height does that add to the actual building, and are there any limits on that height?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the second part of that, there aren't specific limits on the height itself, on numerical limits on the height. But I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
How much typically does it add?
It varies. I think that it's certainly the case with life science laboratory buildings that they tend to have some of the larger types of mechanical equipment that we see could, and it still, it varies both by the type of the building, but it's also, we've seen it vary over time based on different technologies that are being used both within the building and within the mechanical systems of the building. So they might be 25 to 35 feet for a life science lab building. For a residential building, they tend to be lower. They tend to look very different depending on the type of the building, and again, depending on, it really is just a matter of the kind of mechanical equipment and the extent of mechanical equipment that's required to service that particular building.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments before I have two, and I realize this one is preliminary, but the available space that that Alexandria is willing to offer along the right-of-way, the Grand Junction right-of-way, it sounds tight to me, knowing that we need buffers on either side of a path. But you haven't had a chance to look at that yet. It's still preliminary, I assume.
To you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, those dimensions that the proponents mentioned are what we think of for what's needed for the path itself, and does not include any buffer. We have obviously been targeting that as the minimum that we need in order to bring a robust version of the path to fruition.
And that's because the path is both pedestrian and bicycle.
That is correct.
Thank you. The second question is for our zoning czar. Jeff, I notice on the map and the zoning that the zoning for commercial allows less height than the buildings that have been built, I don't know, in the last 10 or 15 years. Is that because the zoning happened after that? What I mean by that is the Clem buildings, the buildings at the corner of Fulkerson and Binney and Fulkerson and the street behind are 70 feet or so, and yet the zoning doesn't allow that.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. The zoning was changed as part of the results of the Eastern Cambridge planning study, as well as I believe the citywide rezoning, which occurred in the same year, changed some of the height limits within those commercial districts, like the Industry A1 district. So because I wasn't working here at the time, I can't quite recall what the zoning was before then and what the height limits were, but those buildings that are on that Binney Fulkerson corner were at least permitted prior to that change in the zone.
Okay, thank you. That makes it clearer. So if there are no other questions by the council, I am going to thank you. Oh, yes. Yes, madam.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to amend my previous answer about the right-of-way, because it does include some buffer, but it's more functional buffer and should not have any vertical impediments. So it's in case a bicyclist falls over, there's clearance so that they are not injured. I spoke about a buffer because in our previous conversations, you have spoken about this as more of a vegetated buffer, so that is not included.
Well, it was noticed by members of the council that there are existing trees in the photographs, and I take it they will not be saved if we put if the path takes up that whole zone. And as you know, many of us want a 25-foot setback on either side for planted trees, and that a bike path with a train and no real buffers is a problem. And I'm hoping that we can modify that in this discussion as we go back and forth. That's why I raised it. So at this point, we're going to open up public comment. I have the first two lists. Oh my goodness. And I'll count how many people. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So far we have 120 people signed up. We have 17 people signed up, and there may be more. You each will have 3 minutes. And the way this is done, just like at the planning board, is you will hear a buzzer, hopefully. And at the buzzer, you have 15 seconds left. That'll be 2.5 minutes. And then at 3 minutes, I'll let you complete a sentence, but I can't let you continue on or, oh my goodness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 30 people signed up. So at 3 minutes, I know you can figure it out, that's an hour and a half. So if there's a lot of repetition, I am going to be professionally rude and say, please summarize. So you've been warned. When you speak to the chair, but you can say the developer said, or the city said, or a councilor said. We don't speak negatively. We talk about the subject. You might not like the design, that's all right, but we don't attack anybody in this room. You wait till you go out in the hall, and then we get attacked quite often. So the first speaker is Jose Luis, who told me I should call him Pepe. So each person, even though we have the list, please give your full name and your address, and then the timing will begin. And the clerk told me that we don't have a buzzer at 15 seconds. So I will, if you see me grab the microphone, that means you're near the end. So, Jose, please begin. Oh, you have to hit the button on there so we can hear you.
Yes,
Great.
good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jose Luis Rojas. I live at 19 Cornelius Way, which is the little red house in the Alexandria slides that we saw. So I just want to share four different pieces of information that I hope are useful in your evaluation of the proposal. The first one is that we've started an online petition opposing this proposal. Doesn't mean that we oppose development, we just oppose this proposal. And as of lunchtime, we have 125 supporters. And I'm just going to read three comments that the people that have been signing the online petition have said. One of them says, "This is a giveaway to developers. What is zoning for individual developers if they get special permits? If the city is going to give the developers, they must get something in return, real value, equal value to what we're giving to the developers." Another person said, "As a homeowner in East Cambridge for 10 years, I welcome biotech in the area, but firmly oppose to the construction of towers that will diminish the character and architecture of the neighborhood and lower the quality of life for my family, friends, and neighbors. Please oppose this construction and help maintain the neighborhood we have." Just one more. "Because I live in the area, I do not want the neighborhood to become an extension of Kendall Square. This is a residential area." So I'm going to leave this for the record.
Thank you. You did very well, and you're a great example for anybody who comes after you. Oh, you're going to continue talking.
Just three quick points.
I take back what I said. Please.
I'll stay within the 3 minutes. I just wanted to point out that the planning board agreed that this is a transitional area and that they want to see a plan that shows or that keeps that in mind, that is a transitional area, and that the real buildings that should be comparable to the building that is being considered should be the buildings along Fulkerson Street, which we've seen are 70 feet, and the garage, which is 63 feet at the top and 22 feet at the back. So it shouldn't be the 120-foot building in Amgen, and that was what the planning board said last night. And the last one, I just wanted to clarify something that the community development memo said, and I quote, it says, "The Beatty to Cambridge Street segment of the Grand Junction Greenway may also be one of the most difficult to implement because land along this segment has more varied ownership than other parts of the corridor. However, as we've been hearing, right now it only has 2 owners, Alexandria and the church, and it sounds like very soon it will only have 1 owner. So I would like us to keep that in mind. It shouldn't be as difficult as it was in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. You went from great to only 12 seconds left. Next speaker is Janice St. Clair, followed by Suzanne Blier. Janice, you're up. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Janice St. Clair. I live at 3 Michael Way in one of the 55 two-story houses bordering the Met Pipe property. The 45-foot height allowed by zoning plus mechanicals is already twice the size of our houses, which peak at 25 feet. To request a skyscraper of 160 feet, which is including their estimated height of mechanicals, is outrageous. To request the use of the FAR for all the land, including that which is to be donated, is outrageous. To ask for any unused FAR to be transferable within 3,000 feet without further oversight was outrageous. And to hold the Grand Junction Pathway Strip hostage to these terms is outrageous. And I believe that we're meant to be outraged. I believe that this is gross manipulation meant to make further quote-unquote concessions in their amended petitions look as if they have responded to surrounding neighborhoods' concerns. Alexandria has already agreed to remove the 3,000-foot FAR request from their proposal. However, our actual concerns, as stated repeatedly throughout this process, are, number one, that any change to the zoning of this transitional area between residential neighborhoods and the cluster of biotowers is highly inappropriate. The city planners knew well what they were doing when they set the 45-foot limit. Alexandria knew the zoning when they bought the property, and they have already admitted that they can make a tidy profit by staying within the current zoning. Our second concern, that any increase in the height of a building right next to our homes and yards would shatter the character of our neighborhood where we raise our children, flowers, and vegetables. Number three, that tying this rezoning petition to the strip of land that the city wants for completing the Grand Junction Pathway puts undue pressure on the city to grant concessions to the great detriment of residential areas on both sides of the property. Alexandria has no other use for that strip of land. A Grand Junction path would enhance commute to their buildings and add beauty and value to their property. It should be a gift or a development done in self-interest, and the city has other ways to acquire the land if it is not. The fourth concern, that any upzoned FAR transfer into the One Kendall Square garage complex would result in other buildings that tower over our homes and yards, creating further issues. And this concern includes the FAR that can already legally be transferred within 300 to 400 feet, regardless of moving the 3,000-foot stipulation. Number five, traffic, which is already very congested on one-way Fulkerson Street and Cardinal Medeiros Avenue.
Thank you, Janice. That's 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
3 minutes.
Everybody can leave
goodness.
their comments in the basket right next to Janice, and that becomes part of the overall package of information.
I couldn't see the warning. Please hold the
I
line.
am the warning, but we're truly, anybody can time us as well.
Mr.
Suzanne, you're next, obviously, and Steve Kaiser is after you.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I'm Suzanne Blier, 5 Fuller Place. And usually I speak before you as a resident and leader in Harvard Square. Recently, the Harvard Square Neighborhood Association has reached out to other neighborhood associations, and I had the unique privilege to attend the East Cambridge Planning Group when this project came before them. And there, as here, I think there are grave concerns about it. We had an important event a couple of weekends ago called How Big is Too Big, bringing together all the neighborhood groups to simply address this kind of question. 45 feet versus 120 feet, there are enormous differences. There are no setbacks. There are other kinds of concerns. There's no housing in this. And as we know, the top priority for Cambridge now is housing. And why that is not here and why one would allow a special permit for this, I simply don't know. I'll also say that last night at the planning board, there were 20-plus speakers who opposed this. And at the end of that, the chair of the planning board was also opposed until CDD came forward and asked for a continuance. This is the process. We need to think about citizens and the actual process of the planning board and respect those processes. Finally, I would say that married to a union steward, I really support unions. But I would also say that in the last 10 years or so, we have 9,500 or so housing units that have been put up in the city, and there are plenty of jobs within this context and others My final point, this is for the special permit and community benefit. Having gone through very carefully the urban form dimension of the Envision Plan, one of the primary goals is to add networks, routes between places in Cambridge, bicycle and otherwise. And as Councillor Malone said, we already have $10 million in place for that. So I think that there are other means of reaching this. I think it's too big for us, and I would hope that you would listen to the residents of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen is next, followed by Vincent Muraca, I believe it is, but you can correct me when you come up. Hi, Stephen.
Yes. On Monday, I brought up the issue of upzoning provisions inherent in the Envision proposals. So the same legal arguments and concerns apply to Alexandria as well. 5 or 6 years ago, I brought up the issue of Article 7 of the Declaration of Rights in the state constitution. The role of government is to serve the common good and not the profit of a special interest. Developers are within that class of special interests and could profit from government actions. Zoning is such an action. Excuse me. There we go. Policy Order number 6 asks what should be the payments or mitigation due from developers when they benefit from upzoning. I would emphasize that upzoning is not prohibited by Article 7, but only the profiting by special interests. Thus, legal upzoning could be allowed if developers contributed 100% of their profits from upzoning to the city. I am pleased that the city solicitor is present tonight because I consider resolving this legal issue to be most important for both Alexandria, Envision, and city government. I question whether the council can continue to consider zoning petitions that may be in violation of Article 7 and run the risk of a decision by a court of law that a violation of Article 7 would require withdrawal of the zoning. When years ago I raised the Article 7 issue publicly, the trigger was an assertion by Mr. Rafferty during a planning board hearing that if a downzoning were approved, the city should pay damages for the loss of land value. I told Mr. Rafferty the opposite condition also applies to upzoning, that upzoning would increase property values and those increases should be paid back to the city. At the time, Mr. Rafferty said he would respond to my complaints by offering a treatise on the meaning of Article 7 as he saw it. I would welcome such an effort by Mr. Rafferty, by this developer.
Stephen,
by
no names, please.
Okay, the city solicitor and outside counsel, since I believe such discussion will be fruitful. I have about half my comment in, Mr. Chairman, so I will submit the rest by email, if that will be okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
By midnight tonight, if you could, Stephen. So Vincent is next, followed by, well, the next person didn't say yes or no. I have to assume it's no because of the big load we have, followed by, looks like Leroy Ward, but I might have that wrong. Vincent, welcome.
Yeah. Hi. Yes, Vincent Muraca here. I'm a lifelong resident of Cambridge, 39A Park Avenue. I graduated from Cambridge Ranger Latin in 1980, served in my U.S. Army, joined the Laborers Local in 1988. I'm currently a labor steward for 17 years now, and I see that this project is a wonderful project, and I believe that it's going to benefit the city of Cambridge tremendously, and I approve of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Did I pronounce Leroy? Thank you, Vincent. Correct me if I couldn't read your handwriting.
Good evening, Councilor. Yes, you did pronounce it right. Leroy Ward, lifelong Cambridge resident. Also a member of Local 151. And I'm just here just to keep it nice, short, and sweet. And I'm in support of the rezoning only because of the employment aspect of it. The people from Alexander said that they will consider to lower the height of the proposed rezoning So I'm sure you all can work that out, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Leroy. Followed by Anderson Lima, and after Anderson, it's Matthew Connolly.
Good evening, guys. My name is Anderson Lima. I live in 566 Windsor Street in Cambridge. I am a 23-year-old gentleman that is part of 151. I do approve of the project just because of I do have a son, and I see future work for myself and be able to provide for my family. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Anderson, thank you. It's always nice to have a gentleman here. So Matthew is next, followed by Mark Ford.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Connolly. I live at 13 Cornelius Way. I'm a member of the Linden Park Residents Association, and most of the comments of myself and my neighbors have already been said on the impact of this height, and as well as in the letter we submitted on January 24th. You were also at the hearing last night, and so I don't want to repeat comments about the impact of this building, including the FAR and the height. I want to make 3 different points very briefly. The first is on the importance of the Grand Junction pathway. It's really important. And when we get up and say we have concerns with this proposal, it has nothing to do with the pathway. The pathway should be built, and it should be built as quickly as possible. But the way to build the pathway is to actually build the pathway. The city should make it a commitment and do it. We've been talking about it for 20 years. And 100 years from now, I worry that we're still going to wonder why the pathway is not built. The second point that I want to make is that I think that the benefits that Alexandria has proposed are not what they seem. A lot of what they've talked about is the development and the benefits from any building whatsoever. I think there will be a building on this site no matter what. And whether it is under the current zoning or the heightened zoning, there will be good jobs, there will be benefits, and there will be economic development. We do not need to approve this proposal in order to get those benefits. The third point I want to make is we've talked a little bit about the community benefits, but we haven't talked at all about the benefits to the developer of the upzoning. One of the questions last night was how do you determine the value of the upzoning on the developer, and how does that compare to what the community is getting? I would submit to you that the way to do it is to look at the value of lab space in the area. If you look at 1 Kendall, that property sold for $1,124 per square foot. If you consider the value of this property under current zoning, Alexandria's building is worth about $180 million. If you look at it under the proposed building, Alexandria would get $500 million. So the value of this upzoning is about $300 million. When you compare that to the 8 foot of space that they're giving next to the train tracks, and you compare that to the hair salon that they got on Cambridge Street, I think we're falling well short. And so I would ask you to consider that as you look at this proposal. And I think that there is a lot more work to be done, as the Development Committee said, and we have a lot more to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Mark Ford is next, followed by, we don't clap or boo here, just out of courtesy and frankly saving time. We're going to be in public comment for at least another hour. And I promise you it gets a little slow. So thank you, Mark. Welcome. And after Mark will be George Schneelock.
Good evening. My name is Mark Ford. I live at 57 Gore Street in East Cambridge. I'm a lifelong resident who's worked on Alexandria projects on Binney Street and Tech Square area. Alexandria is a very responsible developer, and I'm in support of this project in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You get the award so far. George is next, followed by David Boris.
Hi, George Schneelock, 81 School Street, Apartment 1. First, I want to say that I'm not speaking on behalf of any particular group. These are my own opinions. I would like to see the petition go forward in one fashion or another because it seems like the quickest way to get that section of the Grand Junction path built. Getting the Grand Junction built would be a major achievement by the city. People of all ages and abilities could bike from Davis Square to Kendall and parts in between and farther away. My coworker drives from Winter Hill when his bus is unreliable. He and many other people like him could leave their cars at home. It would help people avoid the temptation to hail a Lyft or Uber when they can use a blue bike instead without dealing with the stress of on-street biking. At the planning meeting last night, some people expressed concern that the Alexandria building would bring extra traffic. I asked that the city also consider how many cars would be taken off the road by building this path. In an era of catastrophic climate change, it is so important to do everything we can to avoid unnecessary burning of fossil fuels. I know that the neighbors have generally been supportive of the path and that their objections are largely due to the height of the building. I don't personally have an opinion on how the building should look. I hope there is some compromise which can be made. But this project has taken an extremely long time so far, and having Alexandria purchase the remaining property on this section and pay for the design and building of the path would result in it getting built in a timely fashion. I don't know what the city's appetite is for eminent domain, but they have already spent some money acquiring the easement from Miller's River. It seems simpler to support this petition or some variant to have Alexandria spend the money to build the path. Related to the mayor's comment just now, to make this connection work optimally, the construction of the path needs to start as soon as possible, in time to connect with the Somerville Community Path, which will be completed in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So David is next, followed by Josh Drayton.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Councilors, thank you. My name is David Boris. I live at 126 Harvey Street, and I am also the business manager for the New England Carpenters, Pile Drivers, and Divers Local 56. I'm here to speak in favor of the overlay district. I believe Alexandria has been a good partner for development for the city, for the community. It certainly has provided lots of good jobs with benefits and wages that allow our members to live in dignity in the city. Many of our members, I'm sure you've heard from, are here tonight to speak in favor of this. One thing I want to speak, I can wear two hats here with this because I'm also a parent of somebody who's gone through the Cambridge Public Schools, two sons. And I think that Cambridge actually, one of the things when I think of these 375 jobs is that about every sixth job here will be an apprentice position. And Cambridge does a wonderful job of educating students. We have it's a great school system. I can speak from that personally. But with two big academic heavyweights here, Harvard and MIT, and you've got Tufts and Lesley, and we're surrounded by academia, there is a push, tremendous, the momentum of the city is for all these kids to go into college. And the fact of the matter is, they're not all going to make it. You just look at that, the series in the Globe about what happened to our valedictorians. It's not a solution for everybody, and it's often a pathway to debt and disappointment. But union apprenticeship jobs are great jobs for youth who aren't going to college. And we need to take advantage of this and push this within our school system. The mayor has reached out to the trade unions. We're now at the college nights. And I want to be able to push these opportunities for Cambridge students. Alexandria, with its use of responsible contractors, makes these opportunities happen. More people, more construction workers could live in Cambridge, raise their children here. We could have a more diverse community if we took advantage of these. So I very much support this kind of development, and I want the city to think of some of the benefits as not just, there are physical benefits, but the long-term socioeconomic benefits of having opportunities for its residents. So I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh is next, followed by Sean McHugh. Hi, Josh.
Good evening. Good evening. Josh Drayton, Local 328, Carpenters. Right now I reside at 36A Rice Street. I grew up on Tremont Street, and to be a kid from the YMCA to actually come across and actually speak on my community, I'm pleasured. Two things. I am a young professional who just made out the apprenticeship program, and we're talking about more jobs, ready to make that rate. So I'm excited with my young family, my young daughter. We are very physical and fit and love to get out, ride bikes, and lift weights and do all that stuff. So I need that path to kind of, if we could. And second, of course, would be the jobs, of course, in my community. I said if I could ever speak to try to get more jobs in my community, you bet I'll be there. Again, thank you, Josh Drayton.
Thank you. Sean? Is it S-H-O-N?
Yeah, it's Sean.
Sean, excuse me, Sean, followed by Chris Carrera.
My name is Sean McHugh. I'm a lifelong resident of Cambridge. I grew up on Spring Street. I just want to stress the benefits of the jobs that Alexandria will bring to the community. As a person who struggled their entire life, the turning point in my life was my first job with them 4 years ago on 3rd Street. It helped me financially, obviously, but it started a career for me with the local 328. And since that job, my life has been tremendous. I can't even stress how much better it is. So I just want to try to hope that they come to the community and maybe someone else could benefit just like I did. So I'm in favor of this job coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris is next, followed by Nancy Sung.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me one second.
Chris, you can give us, while you're looking, your name and your address?
Sure. My name is Christopher Correa, lifelong Cambridge resident, Putnam Avenue, currently residing at 19 Plymouth Street in East Cambridge. This site's about 500 feet from my current residence. I'm here representing Carpenter's Local 328 in support of this project. The Met Pipe building is and has been an eyesore, and I feel this proposed building would be a great addition to the neighborhood, regardless of its height, which I'm sure Alexandria and the city will come to terms with something that will please everyone. A project like this would help ensure that I can continue to afford to live in this city for at least the next 4 years while my son attends CRLS and begins that journey. I would like to close by saying that bringing more jobs to Cambridge and providing jobs to actual Cambridge residents are two different things. And I hope that the city, Alexandria Real Estate, and the local trades can come to some sort of agreement to guarantee that a portion of those 375 union jobs actually go to Cambridge residents that live in this city. And that's it for my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Nancy is next, followed by John Sanzone. Welcome, Nancy.
I promise I will be short.
Nancy, you have to speak right
into... Sorry. Okay. I'm going to finish Janet's sentence because I feel the traffic jams are horrible in Cambridge. And I'm going to ask you, Alexandria, how are you going to help to solve this problem? You bring so many jobs, people like the job, but I can understand it. This is one thing. How are you going to help to solve this traffic jam? Second thing is we are just right in the backyard. We're not in Cornelius Way. If the project is just almost like the first proposal is only 95 feet in my backyard. How do you feel, right? It's just different when you don't live in that close to the project. It's completely different story. But besides this, I think the important thing is I would like us to ask Alexandria how they solve our traffic problem. Thank you.
Thank you. John is next, followed by Pamela Van Dort. Welcome, John.
Thank you. John Sanzone, and I'm speaking mostly today as co-founder of the Friends of the Grand Junction Path, which we launched back in 2012, and the seat's right behind me after a city's presentation at that time with my good friend Rachel Burkhart, who actually authored the Cambridge Bicycle Committee's first study of path feasibility all the way back in 2001. So progress has been a long time coming, as all of us know. We've seen just one stretch of asphalt laid and open for walking and biking, the stretch between Main and Broadway. And there is a lot in motion, including the selection of the I-90 alternative by the Secretary of Transportation recently, which preserves path links and transit opportunities for the Grand Junction Railroad corridor. MIT's commitments a couple of years ago, after a study that we also participated in to construct their ownership sections, and the Green Line extension in Somerville, including the Somerville Community Path, which will ultimately join and link with the Grand Junction Path. However, this stretch, the one between Binney and Cambridge Streets, has always been and remained one of the biggest question marks. The obstacles being the patchwork of land ownership that Alexandria has encountered and started to address. The physical limitations of building a path in the Grand Junction corridor are not enormous. The land ownership, control, and negotiation aspect has been long identified as one of the biggest problem areas. And so at one level, this is the type of opportunity and collaboration that the city ought to seek and take advantage of, including development which takes into account in a really conscious way the transportation context, both when it comes to things like walk and bike facilities, but also building transit-oriented density for jobs or housing or otherwise. So there are many very specific considerations to be made on this specific site and work to do still, and the neighbors do deserve to be taken into account. But overall, the Friends of the Grand Junction Path are much more optimistic now than before with Alexandria's work. Thanks.
Thank you. Pamela is next, followed possibly by John Goodman.
Good evening. I'm Pamela Van Dort. I live at 13 Cornelius Way. I won't belabor the points made by my other neighbors, but would refer you to please review our January 24th letter from the Linden Park Residents Association that sets forth many of our concerns in full. Just touching on a few points, Alexandria, the applicant, has referred to the Amgen building to tie its proposal of 120, what's realistically 150 to 160 feet building as the anchor for their proposal. But I would argue that instead, this would be more akin to the 399 Binney Street building that Alexandria is wrapping up construction of. That is a 3-story building that's directly across the street from other residences. And I think is much more in line with the character of having a commercial lab space that could be profitable and good for the developer, but also meet the needs of the residents. So I argue that would be a more comparable building as opposed to the Amgen building that they have focused on so far. Additionally, as my neighbors have mentioned, we don't oppose the bike path. We are pro-bike path. We just oppose how this has been tied to this proposal. Also, I want to clarify specifically what this petition says. It does not say that Alexandria will develop the bike path. Specifically, as written now, it only says Alexandria will provide the land. So any discussion of them actually developing it has not actually been put on the table yet. So to the extent there's discussion of having it be great that Alexandria is actually developing the path, that is not actually included in the proposal. Additionally, I want to emphasize the provisions that allegedly double the FAR or the FAR from 1.25 to 2.5. It's actually much higher than that because it includes the entire pathway land in addition to the development land in that calculation. And we think that's just far too big, far too dense of a building for this transitional area. Specifically, earlier neighbors have offered various evaluations, which was a concern of the planning board last night, of balancing the various interests. One is looking at the value of the land. One is also looking at the revenue that will be generated by Alexandria. A recent article from October of 2018 in Boston.com said the average rent for biolab space in Kendall Square is $85.10 a square foot. Based on the CCD proposal, there's roughly 300,000 additional gross square feet area that would be added as this proposal. While some of that would actually probably not be rentable space, that would still lead to more than $300 million a year, in revenue brought in just from this upzoning, not including what they would already be entitled to under the current zoning. So in exchange, we're offered, again, just a few feet of pathway, not even development of that pathway, and I don't think that's a fair balance, and encourage you to look further into those issues. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate your consideration of our concerns.
Thank you. John, do you wish to speak? Yes. Welcome. After John will be Greg Pollock. Welcome, John.
My name is John Goodman. I live at 8 Fairmount Avenue, which is the other side of Cambridge, but I bicycle a lot. I know this area. It seems pretty clear that something's going to get built. Alexandria wouldn't have bought this property if they didn't think they're going to build something. There'll be jobs. I think what's happening now is there's a negotiation. One of the things that was mentioned early on is that Alexandria would like to do a land swap with Eversource. It's not clear, it wasn't clear to me anyway, that that is definite, but many of the alternative plans depend on having land that seems to currently be owned by Eversource. So Alexandria probably wants some pressure on Eversource so they can get the land so they can make this spread development as an alternative. Also, it's not clear to me, and this may be history that I'm just not aware of, why the Grand Junction Path is on the west side of the railroad tracks rather than the east side of the railroad tracks where the rest of the Grand Junction Path is up until now. So I just think that the city should hold their ground and make sure that it's a plan that works for everybody. There'll be development, there'll be jobs for unions, and there'll be a bike path, but it should be as good as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg, followed by James Coughlin.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Greg Pollock, and I live at 10 James Way in the Linden Park neighborhood. The arguments that I've been hearing this evening for this proposal really center around two issues. One is the completion of the Grand Junction bike path, and the second is about the jobs that it would create in the construction. And I want to make it perfectly clear that the residents of this neighborhood are in support of building something on that site and the jobs that it would create, but to do so within the current transitional zoning as it's already established and laid out by the city's master plan. If we don't obey and make considerations to the master plan, then this just a spot zoning leads to much more of a chaotic circumstance. The second piece on the bike path, we are all in favor of the construction. I ride my bicycle in Cambridge. I am very much in support of the construction of the bike path, but it's a matter of how this transaction is proceeding in order to facilitate the construction of the bike path. It appears to me, and I'm not a veteran of how this process normally works, but Alexandria has purchased a couple pieces of property or purchased one and is negotiating the other for the purposes of facilitating this process. But to me, it seems almost tantamount to a bribe, not to an individual councilor, mind you, of course, but to the city as a whole, because it's a separate piece of a transaction that's brought in to get something really kind of unrelated that they want to see. And so I would ask that the city vote to keep this under the current zoning restrictions at the time and find other ways to get the Grand Junction Bikeway completed. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. So James is next, followed by possibly Isabel, and I can't read Isabel's last name, and on Cornelius Way. James, welcome.
How you doing? My name's James Coughlin. I'm a lifelong Cambridge resident. I reside at 10 Putnam Gardens, member of 328 Carpenters. I'm in support of the Alexandria project. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Isabel, do you wish to speak? And Isabel, if you could give us your last name.
Caceres, Cáceres. Good evening, Isabel Cáceres, 6 Cornelius Way, Cambridge, residence for 28 years and the last 20 in the Linden Park neighborhood. And I am here to express my strong opposition for this outrageous proposal. This proposal will be detrimental to the character and physical environment of our community and will create a precedent to be repeated again in this transitional area. We live in a transitional area. We do not oppose to the Grand Junction. We are pro Grand Junction, and this is the project that the city envisions, and it's our project, it's the city project that includes a bike path by our neighborhood. Alexandria has paired this outrageous upzoning proposal to the city project to manipulate your decision. And I want to mention that from the meeting yesterday with the planning board, there was mentioned at the end by the board that this should be assessed separately, and that's what we want to see too. These two to be assessed separately. The small strip of land that Alexandria has bought and donated, or is going to donate, is a very small portion of the Grand Junction as well, and in exchange for a detrimental impact to residents. I respectfully ask you to keep this current zoning code in this transitional area and protect the character and physical environment of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. After Isabel, Charles Hines, followed by Stephen Aliyev. It's not clear. Welcome, Charles.
Okay. Mr. Chair, my name is Charles Hines. I live at 207 Charles Street. I am here on behalf of the East Cambridge Planning Team as their president. If the chair will indulge me, I'd like to read a portion of a letter I read to the planning board last night. On December 12, 2018, Alexandria presented a design concept for a 430,000 square foot building at 325 Binney Street. If you look at the massing of the building, it's really a Fulkerson Street project. So, you know, when you look down, depending how you look down the street, it looks like Fulkerson, or if you're looking from Kendall Square, it looks like Binney Street. The proposal would almost triple the existing height under the current zoning from 45 feet to 120 feet and double the existing density from an FAR of 1.25 to 2.5. The major concern at the December 12th meeting was the height of the building because, as we mentioned here, the Linden Park neighborhood is made up of two-story residential structures. We asked Alexandria to come back to a follow-up meeting to try to lower the building and spread it out, and that was the chevron design that you've seen tonight. We thought that was a worse design. I think Alexandria agrees, because it's closer to the residences, and it's still 125 feet at one point. There was also concern at the January 23rd meeting that the proposed Eversource power station abutting the parcel and how the two projects would combine. After deliberation among the membership of Linden Park, of the East Cambridge Planning Team, including the Linden Park residents, we resolved to oppose the zoning as it currently is for the following reasons. The height and density allowed in these buildings are out of proportion to the buildings on the northern side of Binney Street, Fulkerson Street, and where the bulk of the building exists in the adjacent Linden Park homes. If you look on the northern side of Binney Street, it's a lot lower. The heights are 65, 75, and that was done intentionally to make a transition to the neighborhood. And if you go along the street, it's 65, 75, 65, 75, then you go to 120, and then you go to the garage at 65. So it just it really sticks out as being too big. The impact of the two-story residential homes in Linden Park includes shade, shadow, noise from mechanicals, light from the building at night, and changes in the look and the feel of the neighborhood, which is a residential C1 neighborhood. The Grand Junction path is not considered appropriate mitigation for this project. If Alexandria does gift the path to the city, constructing the path should not be considered as mitigation for this project. I think that was brought up at the planning board last night too. The Eversource power transfer station planned for the adjacent parcel is really not addressed in the zoning. It will have a profound negative effect on the area. ECPT has requested Eversource to find an alternative location to the station. We asked them to come to meet with us, and they said this was Plan B. So they're looking for a Plan A, a better location for this. If a new location was found, Alexandria has expressed an interest in purchasing the parcel as they think it's a game changer for this project. In conclusion, we join with our Linden Park neighbors and respectfully urge the Ordinance Committee not to support the proposed amendment as written. Thank you.
Excellent timing, Charles. Stephen is next, and if you could give me your last name, Stephen.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Stephen Aliano. I live at 7 Montgomery Street.
Thank you.
I'm a lifelong Cambridge resident, an 18-year union member, and I won't backtrack, but for all the reasons that my fellow union members stated before me, I think that Alexandria is the perfect fit to bring this project forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Lee Ferris, followed by Lino Becerra. Lee, are you here? Oh, there she is.
Hi, Lee Ferris, 269 Norfolk Street. I'm speaking tonight for the Citywide Cambridge Residents Alliance in opposition to this petition for the reasons that you've already heard tonight, the height and the density and their presence in the transitional area. The Residents Alliance strongly supports the Grand Junction pathway. We do not feel that the pathway should be exchanged for granting this petition. It's oversized and it's too close to residents' homes. The decision on the petition should be independent of the bike path, and that's pretty much what the planning board said last night. The city should find other ways to build the pathway. Also want to note that the envision plan says that there should be, we should create an intermediate sense of scale between adjacent activities. In other words, it supports this transition zone. So clearly the zoning indicates that buildings north of Binney Street should be lower than buildings south of Binney Street. And we oppose any proposal that increases the current zoning to allow a taller office building with more density on this corner. We also think that granting this petition would set a bad precedent for allowing other towers to border other residential neighborhoods across the city, and we're concerned that it could set a bad precedent for the parcel on which the parking garage on Binney Street sits. It's important to note that for all these reasons, the planning board last night was very negative about the proposal, which I don't think you've heard about. And initially it discussed giving the proposal a negative recommendation before community development staff pointed out that that would mean that the planning board could not consider a revised proposal for up to 2 years. The planning board also noted that much of the benefits to the city would happen regardless of the size of the building that gets built. Instead of this office building, the Cambridge Residents Alliance would like to see more housing in Kendall Square to accommodate the thousands of jobs being added there. More housing is one of the top Envision plan priorities, increase overall housing production. This parcel is already zoned to have greater density and height for housing. We would strongly support an appropriate residential building in this location, and a residential building would have smaller and quieter mechanicals and would create less traffic and therefore impact residents less. We also note that the proposed open space between the proposed 120-foot tower and an electrical substation is not beneficial or useful to anybody. Lastly, we would request that the council ask the petitioner to preserve all trees on the site until the tree ordinance is revised. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Next is Lino, followed by Ilan Levy. Welcome.
Welcome. Good night. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and City Councilors. My name is Lino Becerra. I'm a Cambridge resident for 28 years. And I haven't missed a single voting cycle so far, and I'm not planning to do that.
Lino, you voted for everybody on the council.
All were
sure.
number one
Yes.
on my vote.
Yes.
I won't reiterate what many of the points that my neighbors have raised. I had like 10 points, and honoring your request to keep it short, I will concentrate on 2. The first one is that something that is missing here is a discussion of the current zoning. So far, we have disregarded that and jumped to the 120-feet building that Alexander is proposing without hearing why is that the current zoning is not working. It is something that has been properly designed. It will provide a transition between our neighborhood and the rest of the city. And I would like to request respectfully from you to give us clear reasons why is that we cannot force Alexandria or expect Alexandria to respect that zoning. Hasn't been any discussions at all about it. And something that is in the room, the white elephant, to call it like that, is the money. This is all about money. Alexandria wants it big because they want the money. And that's something that we have to put into context. The city made $605 million in 2017 in revenues, according to what I received on the mail. They expect to get another 20 million the following year. Alexandria contributes 13.5 million in taxes. So they represent 2.1%. Alexandria represents 2.1% of the revenues of the city. If they get away with what they propose here, then it will increase the contribution from 13.5 to something like 15. If they are to respect what is in the current zoning, they probably will have to give like $14 million. It's only $1 million difference that the city will not receive. And I wonder, and I request for you to tell us, is that 1 million in 620 worth impacting our lives, worth changing the quality and the character of a neighborhood for 1 extra million in a 620 million that you receive? Thank you.
Thank you. Ilan, followed by Matthew Nays.
Good evening. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Ordinance Committee. I'm coming here to talk obviously asking the same question as Lino, and I want to repeat that question because it's so obvious.
Okay,
Why
hold
are
on.
we-
So you live
Yeah.
at 148
Spring Street. Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Why are we actually being requested to consider an increase in zoning that is completely disproportionate to what is actually asked by zoning in a spot which is actually completely transitional from Binney Street into the East Cambridge neighborhood? We have been, we know that over the last 10 years, we have kept on permitting zoning increases for Alexandria and many other real estate companies. And over the years, we have been told that they would have no impact on our neighborhood. Well, we haven't seen, we've also been told and have been given a lot of benefits, of which we haven't seen anything concretely. The park on 3rd and Rogers hasn't happened. The Foundry is still stuck in the quagmire of trying to get built. Whatever other benefit has East Cambridge received? An increase in traffic, more noise and light pollutions, and much more, a decrease in the quality of life in general. And now we have on top of that Eversource and a fire station which are being proposed right on Fulkerson. And if there is a surprise with City Council that a fire station is also being proposed, let me update you on that. So we know that Eversource has bought a property right next to the lot of Alexandria. That property they have bought because there is an increase in the requirement of energy created by Kendall Square. That energy needs to be transferred somewhere, and the only spot left is right next to the Kennedy Longfellow School, where we have our youngest children, and we are here not even talking about it. The elephant in the room. We are actually talking about upzoning and actually bringing benefit to
Alon, excuse me, the focus.
And I have 3 minutes.
No, yes,
and the focus
but I have
is
to
actually
correct
on
you.
this zoning. It is on this zoning.
Alon,
And the fact, hold on,
please
let me
listen
finish.
to me. I'll
get
give
to the
you the
point.
time.
I'll get to the point.
Please,
I'll
that's
get to the
exactly
point.
my point.
I'll get to the point.
Eversource is not before us. We haven't seen anything yet.
So let me go.
Now you can talk about the petition.
So we have been told not only that Eversource has talked to the city, we have been told that the fire station, that the city has also planned a possible fire station in an ongoing conversation with Alexandria, Eversource, and themselves. So that's what we've been told. And I am not myself, but the community of East Cambridge and ECPT. It has been on our thread. So if you don't know about it, please let us know so that we don't spin our wheels. Secondly, Eversource is an entire part because this is considered like spot zoning. We're considering one piece of land without considering the context in which it's being evolving. The context in which it evolves is the fact that there is a substation right next to it that you are not considering. And that is also zoning. That is actual planning. So I'm asking you to do planning and to consider the entirety of the area rather than one particular parcel for such an increase in density that is actually has no reason of being. And that I'm also quite surprised that you are not familiar with the ongoing negotiation of the city with either Eversource or Alexandria regarding what is going on. It is actually really, really surprising that you don't know because supposedly it is City Council who are carrying this information around. Thank you.
This is our first meeting and on the subject, and we are all being introduced to many issues. Thank you. Matthew, you're next, followed by Joel Fishman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and city councilors and fellow Cambridge citizens. My name is Matthew Nays. I live at 15 Cornelius Way in the Linden Park neighborhood. I've been a Canterbridgian for 11 years. I have 3 young children who will attend the new King Open School in the fall. I come here today not for myself and not for Linden Park and my fellow neighbors and not for my kids, but I come for my grandkids and I come for my great-grandkids. Because the decisions that we make here today, the decisions that we make for our city, will echo for many years beyond which we're going to live here, many years beyond which we're going to live and die. So the decisions that we make are extremely important for those who will come after us. And when I look out my window, when I look out my roof deck, I look east into the most horrific monstrosity building that's ever been built. And it's called the Sullivan Courthouse Jail. And that building is visible to all, and we know that that building could not have been built with significant foresight. It was built in 1971, approximately 50 years ago, and every time I walk out onto my roof deck, I think the same thing. What were they thinking? And I'm not an architect. I'm a physician. But just as you don't need to be a doctor to recognize health, you do not need to be an architect to recognize aesthetics. And the proposal here today violates the principles of urban design and aesthetics. And really what I'm asking here today is to wonder, what will my great-grandchildren think when they look out their window? Will they look out the window and not notice anything? Because the scale of the building that will be built is appropriate for the neighborhood, as my neighbors have indicated. And the only thing towering over our neighborhood will be mature oak trees. Or will they look up at a looming, glooming, fuming biotower and wonder 50 years ago today and ask, what were we thinking?
Thank you, Matthew. Joel is next. Joel Fishman, followed by Yi Jen Huang.
Members of the Council, good evening. My name is Joel Fishman. I live at 1 James Way in Cambridge. I'd like to bring up 3 quick points. The first one, I'd like to stake out a rather heretical position and say that I don't care about the bike path. I say that not because I'm opposed to bikes or bike paths. I think it'd be a wonderful thing if it went in there. But frankly, it just isn't much of a bargaining chip. Unless one is going to remove the Grand Junction railroad tracks, which are still in place and will still be used, it is a really unpleasant place. The trains park along this section of track and sit there idling for 20 minutes at a time, belching diesel fumes. This is not a pleasant place to be. There is already a connection for bicycles between Binney and Cambridge Street by using the dedicated cycle track on Fulkerson. So there's not a real pressing need for it. But I do understand why people want this. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be a nice thing, except that it's just not much of a bargaining chip. The second point I would like to make is sort of related to this in terms of the air pollution and the issues about this larger development. The first is on the height of the building. Not one person has mentioned the existing park, which is at the corner of Fulkerson and Charles Street. This would be directly in the shadow of this larger building. So we have this little pork chop park that we've added on one side of Binney, but on the other side we have an existing park and athletic fields attached to the Kennedy School, which are now going to be in shadow. The third point I'd like to bring up, again, goes back to this issue of the air pollution. The traffic in the neighborhood is bad, as Nancy Tsung says, but people don't realize, I think, the scale of how bad the pollution in the area has become. We are surrounded in our neighborhood by 3 major construction projects at the moment. All of these construction sites are belching diesel fumes 8 hours a day, every day. Cardinal Medeiros is supposed to be a truck-free route. There has been 0 enforcement of that. 0 enforcement over the past 6 years. I have not seen a single truck stopped on this street. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the traffic backs up from Cambridge Street down past James Way in a constant line of cars and trucks, belching fumes. By the time you get to rush hour, that line extends all the way down past Cornelius, down to the current construction site where Alexandria is building at 399. All of this is producing a tremendous amount of pollution. I say this in terms of this construction because it's not just the height of this building, it's its density. There are going to be that many more cars, that many more trucks that are coming into our neighborhood at this enormous building which is planted right on the edge of a residential neighborhood. I understand that development has to continue in Kendall Square, and I'm not opposed to development, but there is no reason for something of this density right up against a residential neighborhood. And I would ask that the council deny this petition for a change in the zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Yi Chen, welcome. Yi Chen is the last person on our list, and I will ask if anybody else has anything to offer after he is completed. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and the city councilors. That actually was, I was afraid of, since you didn't mention any name behind me. Since I might be the last who speak, I want to be as brief as I can. I'm here to speak my opposition to this proposed petition, all the points that my neighbor in Linden Park has mentioned. And I want to just reiterate what Lino who just mentioned, that we actually should seriously take a look at the current zoning as a light industry and commercial, that it not only has the merit, but also it actually can create a very nice development to accomplish all those who have spoken for the project, to create the jobs and still maintain the current characters that the surrounding neighbors actually would like to see. And the other point that Joe just mentioned, that actually air pollution is indeed also a major concern, because it's already clear that this is a lab building. Lab building is a very specific building type that we kind of take it lightly as a part of industry building, but they actually have all those negative impact, the light pollution at night, the acoustic. No matter how much effort you put in to address it, indeed, it's actually like a stacked factories that per se. You know, if in the old days you consider those smoky industry damage the living quality of the residential area, the bio towers that Cambridge is witnessing these days are just those old day industry, simply putting out the pollutions without the actual visible smokes. So again, I am opposed this petition, and I hope city councilors and Mr. Chairman could take our positions into consideration seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if someone else wishes to, we're not done yet. Are you leaving? No, I'm kidding. You're allowed to. Oh, you wish to speak.
Yes, I
stay
do.
right there. If someone else wishes to speak, they've not put their name on the list, we will allow you to speak. But if you could, either add new information or say you're in support, I believe, of construction, that's fine. Please give us your name and address.
Thank you, sir. Minor Perez, M-Y-N-O-R, Perez. I live at 1137 Massachusetts Avenue, Unit 5. Mr. Chairman, I have a great pleasure of being first-generation immigrant from Guatemala. And as my colleague Dave Boris mentioned, had it not been because of the apprenticeship and training program from the Carpenters Union, I can tell you that I know I would have no future. This project here, with respect to my neighbors, is very important. The challenges we face in the labor movement every single day is how can we put out to work single mothers in our apprenticeship program, single fathers, and many people who have no more than a high school diploma. Those are the problems that we face every single day. Projects like this will help to address the economic inequality. As we all know, unions still are the only subway into middle class. We have heard pretty much all arguments, and pretty much everything has been said, but with that, it is with great respect I ask you to please consider the rezoning and approve this rezoning for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Peter Valentine's hand up. Peter, please come forward. And if anybody else wishes to speak, they will be able to.
Peter Valentine, 37 Brookline Street. It seems like it's common sense. You have domestic housing, and you don't want overwhelming buildings built next to domestic housing. So if that's the case with Alexandria, then they should have been told, no, you can't do it there because they're domestic housing. So I guess It's a matter of education and common sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Anyone else wish to add a comment? I see no one else's hand up, so I'm going to close public comment. And at this point, the council will have the opportunity to discuss the issues before us, to ask additional questions if there are any of the petitioner or the city, and we'll try and figure out where we go from here. I do have something to report at the end, which is in the Volpe project, Volpe rezoning, which, by the way, gave us the rights to part of the Grand Junction. We had a series of discussion meetings between the chairs of the Ordinance Committee at the time, Councilor Chung and myself, Community Development, and the petitioner, and there has been initial dialogue at the Planning Board hearing that might occur again, and we might talk further about that. But members of the council, if there's any comments, I see my fellow Councilor Toomey reaching.
Thank you,
Please.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here tonight. A lot of very insightful comments and concerns raised by the residents, and I would just want to say that I think this is the beginning of the process. The dialogue has to continue, and I think people, I'm sure, have heard loud and clear the concerns, the major concerns, especially in the height and the density and the mitigation package. So I know the Councilor Carlone and Councilor Chung, I thought was a very productive process that you undertook on that, and I'm hoping something similar can take place with these discussions as we move forward. I think that's very, very important. So.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone who presented and came to speak. I want to start by saying that I am increasingly appreciative of the fact that planning board meetings are now streamed online and recorded, so that I think almost all of us, even if we weren't able to attend last night, have been able to hear the planning board's discussion, which, was, I would say, they were pretty much ready to reject the petition last night, and they continued it on the advice of staff and in the interest of allowing more dialogue, which I think is appropriate. But there were a lot of really salient comments. Among them, Hugh Russell, asking why it is that we continually essentially put the burden on residents through upzoning and inappropriately large buildings to pay for the things that are the public benefits. And he did mention the Alewife Railroad Bridge, which we're still waiting for. I think, and Ted Cohen raised the point that that we need to separate the planning aspects of this building project from the desire for the path, and that we could potentially have used or use eminent domain or other means to acquire the rights of way that we need, so that we don't always need to be putting the public on the line for the things we want. I think it also goes to the policy order that we discussed on Monday night about giving the council the tools with which to appropriately value the financial benefits and other benefits of upzoning. And I think it's quite interesting that was about 3 residents tonight who came and gave us very specific estimates of what that increased or incremental value is. In my opinion, that information should be provided to us. It should be calculated and provided as part of future staff memos. We are essentially conducting contract zoning in these upzonings, and we don't have the information. And I'm glad there's some smart residents out there who can look at square foot rents and this, that, and the other, and taxes and stuff. But, that shouldn't be on them. That should be on our staff to provide us that information so that we are not negotiating blind. I certainly understand the desire for more jobs and particularly pathways for Cambridge residents to access the opportunity that union jobs, offer. I think that's great. Looking around the city, I wouldn't say that there is a shortage of construction, and that, if upzoning, if continual upzoning is our pathway to economic opportunity, we will soon be upzoning the entire city ad infinitum, because at a certain point, this just isn't sustainable. So I think something will be built there and there will be jobs, but we do not need to upzone for that. I would like, as one of the speakers asked, that the FAR be calculated without the strip of path, because that is not really an apples to oranges FAR calculation. And I think that's what I have to say. I think it's pretty clear that I don't think, as one of the planning board members said, this is ready for prime time. Thank you.
Thank you. I was at the planning board meeting. I think I need to qualify your comments a little bit. One member, the chair, didn't want it to move forward and wanted a negative response. The others pretty much indicated that the heights need to be changed, and especially closer to the residential edge. And the other point I wanted to make is thank you for saying that about the policy order on upzonings. Those of you interested in that, if you really want to come back Monday night, we can talk about that as well. Did you want to follow up?
Well, only to say that I did take notes of what they said, and Steve Cohen said that he didn't think they should bother coming to the council with it yet.
With the proposal.
With the proposal that they
As
presented
it
last
is.
night.
And I think that was
I'm glad
true.
they did. I think it's good that we got to hear it in the original form, and that the members of the public got to come and speak again, or for the first time for some of them. But I felt that they were really not at all ready to forward this, certainly not with a favorable recommendation. So
I totally agree with that consensus. And that is what I felt as well. Councillor Zondervan and then Councillor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some questions about the zoning. I did appreciate some of the comments that we really should be looking at the entire piece of land, because there are questions about the Eversource substation there. I think that should be included in the zone. I have a question, I guess, for CDD or for my colleagues. Is there a plan to put a fire station on Fulkerson Street? This is the first I've heard of it.
As I understand it, if the developer offers land, the city will decide in what they do there, and there has been comments that a fire station is needed, just like Eversource is now saying more energy is needed. It's just one of the elements. You might not know this, but Pork Chop Park was going to be a fire station location. And for a number of reasons, that decision was changed. Probably, I'm looking at Tim, I think about 20 years ago. Was it longer than that, Councilor Toomey? This is a potential fire station.
Well, if history be told, when the across from Legal Seafood is now a hotel, I can't think of the name, that was a fire station in Kendall Square, and I opposed that closing probably in the 90s, and have been advocating for a fire station somewhere in the neighborhood, and certainly we've seen how much development has come into that area. So whatever takes place on this zoning thing, if land does go to the city, it would be the city administration and, would say with the consent of the council, would determine what type, in the residents, what type of use would be best beneficial on that land that's deeded to the city. So there's nothing in stone. I mean, it's been talked about for many, many years. People, some residents bring it up, and usually once a council term, someone brings in a resolution asking that be looked at. So, but I'm trying to think of the name of that hotel. It's a little boutique hotel. What is it? And that was a fire station. It had 2 engines in there. But,
okay, thank you. So, Councillor Zondervan, please continue.
Thank you. And also the EXO communication site, is that going to continue to be there? I think it makes sense to look at the whole zone as one piece rather than just the part where Alexandria wants to build.
Councillor, if I could just comment on that. The petition is what is before us. Certainly planning of the area around it impacts that. But from changing the zoning in adjacent areas is actually not it. It could be a recommendation that's looked at. Sorry, please continue.
Thanks. I completely agree, and that's what I'm suggesting, that we do include that planning into this conversation. Maybe we can get some guidance from CDD on that in the future. I do think this is a great opportunity for developing the Grand Junction and developing the site. But I agree with my colleague and with the planning board that the proposal as it's before us now is not ready for prime time. So I hope we can get an updated version that addresses the neighbors' concerns. I happen to live across the street from another Alexandria project nearby. Both Alexandria and the Linden Park residents are my neighbors. And, my understanding is that the site across the street from my house, it took many years to get to a development that the neighbors actually agreed with. And hopefully this won't be that long a process. And that building is actually quite nice. I'm looking forward to its completion. It's a huge improvement from what was there. And I think, Alexandria will be a great neighbor. So I'm optimistic that we can resolve this discussion and get something great out of it. I also want to speak to the jobs issue because, I'm an immigrant myself. I worked as a landscaper as a teenager, and I think it does bring this bigger question on economic justice that we set this up as some kind of conflict between jobs and what the neighbors want, and I don't think that's the right way to look at it. As has been said, something will be built there, and there will be jobs created as part of that. And I don't think we are debating that. We're just trying to decide what is the right amount of building for that site. And I think what's before us right now is too much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Siddiqui was next, and then I'll go to the other councillors if they wish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. So I concur with my colleagues and the points they've made. This is more of a general comment to the city. In the memo, we just went through a 3-year envision process and not seeing the word envision in the memo at all. To Lee Ferris's point, I think it would have been very helpful to tie some of that into this memo. We have a summary of past planning work, but a summary of what this means for the future in the context of envision. We haven't voted on what envision is exactly, but there has been a lot of money and time put into that. So what does that mean? And going to Vice Mayor Devereaux's point of those numbers and those values, I think will just help us make this decision a little bit more clearer. And then on a legal standpoint, I'm vaguely familiar with some of the previous challenges to upzoning, to rezoning that the city has had, Farrington versus City of Cambridge and so forth. And I've read some of the statements about what spot zoning looks like, the various claims. I'm not a zoning expert and not a zoning attorney, but I think it would be helpful because there have been some claims by residents of spot zoning to clear that up for me when we talk about this again, because there's a statement in this case where the zoning was upheld. They did say a spot zoning claim will fail unless the plaintiff can show that the rezoning is arbitrary and unreasonable or substantially unrelated to public health, safety, or general welfare and bears no rational relation to the public good. Here we have a public good that Alexandria had bought outright before we've considered zoning. So while the case also said there's no persuasive authority for the proposition that an otherwise valid zoning enactment is invalid if it is in any way prompted or encouraged by a public benefit voluntarily offered. So, just reading this, I don't know. And I think moving forward, it would be helpful to clear that up for the council, any potential claims. So those are my points. Law school never leaves you, So I think that, as Councillor Toomey said, Councillor Zondervan said, and others have said, I think this will be developed into something. There are trade-offs. I think we, as a council, have to understand those trade-offs. It's the conversation is. I think it's still premature, and I think. We know that the residents want lower height. The planning board is not in line with happy with the height. The residents have asked for lower height. I think we're getting there. So I think that's the next proposal that I think we'll see. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mayor, and thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple things. I think it's pretty clear that we're not ready to move on this at this point. So I think that's pretty clear. I think we're all in agreement of that. I just have two quick things that I heard in public comment that I want to address. First, we heard a couple of people ask the question of why we're even talking about an upzoning, and it's really simple. Alexandria has a legal right to petition for an upzoning, and we have a legal obligation to hear that petition. There's nothing secretive about it or nefarious about it. This is the process. Just like if a citizen group gets enough signatures to bring forward a petition, we have to hear the petition. So that's why we're hearing it. There's nothing unusual about that. That's what we do. And I do want to say something about the community benefits. And let me just make this disclaimer so that nobody misinterprets why I'm saying this. I am not saying that these community benefits are sufficient, nor am I saying that I am I'm ready to approve this petition as it stands. But I do, in the spirit of transparency and conversation, we have focused that the community benefits for this is just about the Grand Junction path. But I do want to point out $6+ million in linkage fees that will go to preserving and creating affordable housing. That's a community benefit. $88+ million in tax revenue. And if folks think that that's not important, last night at the school committee meeting, we were talking about passing a school department budget of over $200 million for 7,000 kids in our Cambridge public schools. Not to mention the $500 million we're spending on new school construction. None of that happens if we don't have the tax revenue generated by commercial projects like this. So that is another community benefit. So I just think when we talk about, it's more than just the path, right? It's talking about, that there are multiple benefits to this, but again, so that nobody misinterprets this, I am not saying that I think those benefits are necessarily sufficient, nor is it enough for me to sign off on a 120-foot project at this site. But I think as we discussed this, I just wanted to point out there are more benefits to the community than just the path, and I think those things have to be taken into consideration, as they are with all the projects when we talk about this. So that's all.
Councilor Mallon, do you wish to have comments?
Yeah, I just want to quickly wrap this up because I think everyone's ready to go home and eat their dinner. Watching the planning board last night was really instructive, and I will echo the vice mayor's comments that it's really great to have it streamed so we can watch it, but also to have the planning board meetings before the ordinance committee meetings, because that doesn't always happen. And the one thing that struck me was the statement, this is not ready for prime time. And I think we all agree. I think everyone, even probably the petitioners, agree that this isn't ready for prime time, and we're not ready to vote on this. For me, I just feel like the trade-offs right now are too high between what the upzoning looks like and what we're actually going to get. Even to your point, Mayor McGovern, all the things that you listed that aren't just the path, I think it's important to talk about those things, the linkage fees, the taxes. But for me right now, I do feel like those trade-offs are very high. And so there's lots of work to be done. And I look forward to, as you mentioned before, Mr. Chair, having a group come together and really iron out what's really going to work for everybody in this project. Obviously, there is going to be a building that's going to be built. There is going to be a pathway that is going to be the Grand Junction path, and there are going to be jobs that are created. But we need to do this in a thoughtful way, and I think everyone here around the table, the petitioners, the city council, and the neighbors are really ready to do that work. So I look forward to what's next, and I want to thank everyone for being here, particularly all of the people that came to public comment 2 nights in a row. So thank you for being here and lending your voices to this.
Thank you. Typically, we almost always have our ordinance meeting after the planning board. There have been occurrences where the schedule didn't work out, but for the reason you cited, yes, it makes all the sense to get that input. Please keep in mind that half of this building and square footage is going to get built, because that's what the existing zoning is, assuming the developer moves forward. So half of the benefits cited are not in discussion. It's the additional benefits. And we can talk later at future meetings about what are the real benefits and what are not necessarily new benefits. So if Mr. McGuire and Assistant City Manager could come to the table as we conclude this meeting. Last night in the discussion came up the notion of regrouping a small group like at the Volpe process, and I don't want to put extra meetings on anybody's schedule, but I know earlier Mr. McGuire said he'd be open to doing that, and I believe Eric Thorkelson was the urban designer, but you might pick another, perhaps Khalil, to sit in and talk about everything we've heard tonight before we schedule the next meeting here. Would you consider that, or would you be willing to do that? Ms. Farouk and Mr. McGuire, because I think it would be almost silly for us as a council to meet in the ordinance committee without further work going on.
To respond to your question, Mr. Chair, we would be, from the CDD side, and I suspect Alexandria, we would be willing to absolutely happy to sit down with the proponent and discuss the various options and what work needs to be done. But just thinking back to last night's discussion at the planning board, one of the things that they had requested is the proponent also speak with neighbors. And I think that might be an important part of the puzzle, which is work that Alexandria might need to do with the folks who are here today, in addition to the conversation with us.
And Mr. McGuire, if you wish to have another member of your team to join you, I saw you look left, That would be fine right now.
I'd like to have it more, at least.
You got to speak into the microphone or nobody.
I would agree to these meetings, and if we could have a member, and if we need to have proper staff there for architectural and other analysis, we're willing to provide that. So.
And do you both feel comfortable if a representative from the neighborhood were there, or at the beginning you'd rather that not be the case?
I'd like to see someone that's in opposition be present.
Yes, okay. That's generous of you. That did not happen in the Volpe discussions, although the end of the Volpe discussion was very productive. Well, I want to thank everyone that's been here. Does anybody else want to add a comment? The mayor's asking, do we actually have to move to keep it in committee? We do, don't we?
You could keep it in committee, keep the subject matter. You can move it and have it remain in committee, but keep the subject matter
Before the... Okay. I've been told that we do need to move to keep it in committee, but keep the subject matter before the ordinance committee. Thank you. I know you want to leave. And unless there's other comments, I just want to thank everybody for a very detailed discussion and comment period, just like last night. Actually, a little more tonight. And this has been very informative for all of us here tonight. So thank you. Move to adjourn, yes. Meeting is concluded. Thank you.